Thank you. I want to start by thanking you for allowing me to share this very special day with you. I was proud when I was invited to be your commencement speaker, and even prouder not to have been disinvited. or forced to withdraw because of student protests. Thanks for that. I actually feel very connected to Bryn Mawr. 2 years ago, one of the women graduating here is now our associate producer for online media, Molly Seavey-Nesper. So I feel very connected. So many of you know me as the lady you were forced to listen to in your parents' car or in the carpool on your way to and from school every day. And here you are on one of the most important days of your lives, forced to listen to me again. And you're probably wondering, so what's she going to do today? Ask questions? That's not going to work, is it? The best thing I can do is share with you some of my own experiences and hope that it might be relevant to the occasion. In biographical interviews, I often focus on the period that many of you have just come through, a guest's late teens and early 20s, because this is when a person becomes who or he or she is. It's the period when we gradually will the adult version of ourselves into existence. In fact, I think of college, particularly out-of-town college, not as just a place for higher education, but a place for self-transformation as well. When you're growing up, your parents, your teachers, even your closest friends may think they know who you are and what to expect from you. But maybe you think you're not really the person everyone else thinks you are. Yet if you start behaving differently, even if you start dressing in a different way, people might think it's out of character and that you're being a phony, so that you're trapped. But once you leave for college, you leave behind everyone else's conception of who you are. And this can be liberating. You can change how you look, and on a deeper level, you can change aspects of your personality and develop into the person you want to be. I speak from experience. I was raised in a very structured, goal-oriented, middle-class family, and straight through high school, I studied hard and I got really good grades. But that person I was in high school, I didn't want to be that person anymore when I started college, in part because, if I'm being honest, I worried that the new people I was meeting would find that person boring. It was 1968, which I mentioned because knowing the era might help make sense of some of the things I tried, beginning with dropping out of school for a semester and hitchhiking cross-country with my boyfriend. On returning to school, I went to as few classes as possible and did as little work as possible. I tried on various personalities. I tried becoming a hippie. But being a free spirit proved impossible for someone as self-conscious as I was and still am. I was briefly part of a wannabe rural commune in which we slept in tents, grew vegetables, and attempted to dig our own well, but I mean, what was I thinking? I cannot function without flush toilets and restaurants within walking distance. As ludicrous as some of this seems to me now, it was actually very liberating. All of it helped teach me who I was by teaching me who I wasn't. And yet I retained certain traits of each of those people I tried to be because some of those traits genuinely were me. Remember how I said I was determined to stop being so studious? Well, now when people want to compliment me on my interviews, they'll say, wow, you really do your homework. And I mean, I do. For better or worse, I spend nearly every weekday night at my desk pouring through research for the following day's interviews. So it turns out, the studious person I was in high school, the person I thought I bid farewell on leaving home, took her place beside all the people I tried to remake myself into in college. Who you are is still evolving, and you may find that, like me, you end up drawing on those parts of yourself that you once rejected because they didn't seem cool enough or interesting enough. Most of my guests on Fresh Air are on the show because they've been successful in their given fields, but I often find myself talking with them about the frustrations and outright failures they've experienced professionally or in their private lives. And I think this is because I believe we're shaped by our failures, by our weaknesses and setbacks, at least as much as we are by our successes. And in many cases, those failures make ultimate success possible. I speak from experience when it comes to frustration, self-doubt, and even outright failure. I failed miserably at my first profession, which wasn't radio, it was teaching 8th grade English. Not that I felt teaching was my calling, but there I was, an English major, clueless about what I might do professionally, so I figured I'll be a teacher. But I was completely unprepared for how difficult it would be. I didn't have what it took to be an authority figure. You can tell from looking at me, I was not physically imposing. At 5 feet tall, I had to look up at my students. The taller ones towered over me. There was always chaos in the classroom when I could get the kids into the class. Half the time they were in the hallway. So I knew I wasn't cut out for teaching. So did the principal. And when he fired me after about 6 weeks, I actually felt relief, something resembling gratitude. Still, it was a shock to fail so abysmally, so quickly out of college. But it turned out to be the biggest break I ever had because it enabled me to stumble into public radio. And this sounds like a cliche, but I really believe failure can be a blessing in disguise. I never would have thought a career in radio was possible for me. When I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s, there were very few women on radio. And broadcasting was only one of many professions women were virtually absent from. In my neighborhood, most of the women were full-time homemakers. The few who held paying jobs worked in what were then the only professions open to women, teaching, nursing, secretarial work, or they helped out with their husbands' businesses. I had no clue how to break into any profession other than these. But after being forced out of teaching and then doing temp work, I asked myself, so what do I really want to do? And I realized I wanted to work in media. But how? I mean, I was neither confident enough nor assertive enough to think such a career was feasible. Fortunately, there was public radio where women's voices were starting to be heard. I became a volunteer at a college radio station where just about everyone on the air was a volunteer. Public radio stations were different then. They hardly had any money or listeners. So I was able to learn on the air without much complaint about how ridiculously amateurish I sounded, which was a good thing because my voice was about an octave higher than it is now. I spoke a lot faster than I do now, and I think I sounded like a feminist Minnie Mouse. But it soon became apparent I'd found my place. And once I started doing radio, I came to realize there was a gap of sorts between the person I was on the air and the person I was in private life. On the air, I am capable of asking anybody anything. But take away the mic, and I can become uncomfortable, self-conscious, and insecure. In my personal life, I try to be nice to people. I want them to like me. I was socialized to be accommodating, something I think I share with most women of my generation, and perhaps yours as well. But when I started producing a radio show, I had to learn to say no. I have to reject people who want to be on Fresh Air but aren't accomplished or interesting enough to be on. I also need to be willing to ask guests challenging questions and to deal with the consequences if my questions rub them or some listeners or bloggers the wrong way. I'm telling you all this because I suspect that many of you are going to experience a similar dichotomy between the person you are on the job and the person you are in private life. But that's okay. It's all part of the total you. I hope that you all go on from here to fulfilling lives and careers. Just be aware these might not be the lives or careers that others envision for you or that you envision for yourselves right now. And that's okay. If I'm any example, college may be a laboratory for experimentation and self-transformation, but commencement, leaving the lab and becoming a full-fledged adult, doesn't mean you're going to stop growing. When I left college, I realize now, the only thing I knew for sure was that I wanted a life different from my parents. Remember how I mentioned that few women in my neighborhood worked outside the home? I wanted a career, and I didn't feel compelled to marry right away, if at all. I decided not to have children and was fortunate in being from the first generation of American women who had the effective birth control that made that choice possible. And and the first generation of women for whom changing social standards meant that those of us who reached middle age without having become mothers would no longer be regarded with pity. I know... I know now that each generation of young adults, and maybe each generation of young women in particular, at least holds the potential, based on their own experiences and desires, to change the expectations of adult life in some small or perhaps some sizable way. It's your turn now, and based on all you've accomplished so far, all that brought you here today, I'd say you're going to do great. But what I really want to say most of all is congratulations. Thank you.